A book on the shelf is just paper. A book in your mind is power. Welcome to Season 1, Money and Mindset. We are here to rewrite your internal script. Let's decode.
We've been told this book is the gold standard for being a nice person.
But if you look at the mechanics, it's actually a manual for social friction reduction.
For 90 years, it has taught leaders how to move through the world without triggering the most dangerous alarm in existence.
The human ego.
Carnegie doesn't ask you to be good. He asks you to be invisible.
Today, we are decoding How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Not as a self-help classic, but as a technical blueprint for navigating the subconscious no.
By the end, you'll see that influence isn't about changing someone's mind. It's about protecting their version of reality until they agree with yours.
So our mission here is pretty specific. We take the source material, and in this case, it's a text that has just saturated Western culture for almost a century.
It's everywhere.
It is. And our job is to strip away all the narrative fluff, the folksy anecdotes. We aren't here to review the book or tell you if it's good in some moral sense.
Right. We're here to analyze the core structures, to look at the raw data contained within it and figure out the underlying system.
Exactly, the operating system.
Precisely. And for this particular analysis, we're applying a very specific lens. We're calling it the ego preservation interface.
The ego preservation interface.
The ego preservation interface. Okay, break that down.
The core premise we're working with today is that human interaction at its base level isn't really about the exchange of information or logic.
No.
Not primarily. It's a series of, let's call them security protocols, that are designed for one purpose, to protect our own sense of self-importance.
So every conversation is a security check.
In a way, yes. And if you read Carnegie really closely and you ignore that warm, friendly tone, what you find is basically a technical manual on how to bypass that security system.
You know, it's interesting you call it a security system. Because when people pick up this book, they're usually thinking about, what, sales? Or maybe just getting along with their coworkers.
Right. It feels very soft. It feels incredibly soft. But you're framing this as a hard, almost mechanical interaction, a series of protocols and firewalls.
Because the data in the book suggests it is mechanical. We have this tendency, to romanticize conversation as a true meeting of minds.
Sure. A rational exchange of ideas.
Yeah, but Carnegie treats it more like a meeting of two highly volatile chemical compounds. If you don't handle the mixture correctly, if you don't stabilize it, it explodes.
And the ego preservation interface is that stabilizer.
It's the stabilizer. It's the protocol that keeps the whole thing from blowing up.
Okay, so let's get into those mechanics. The first pillar of our analysis today, we're calling it the logic of invisibility.
This is the absolute foundation of the entire system. The source text implies pretty strongly that what we call niceness isn't really a moral virtue in this context.
Not about being a good person.
No, it's a friction reduction mechanism. The goal is strategic camouflage. And to really understand why this is so critical, we have to look at the baseline data he presents regarding success in highly technical fields.
Right. He cites that very specific study. It was conducted, I believe, under the banner of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching.
That's the one.
And I want to spend a moment on this because the numbers in it are they're deeply counterintuitive. They looked at the engineering profession. Now, if you ask me, or anyone really, what makes a successful engineer, I list off hard skills.
Of course. Math, physics, structural analysis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you build the bridge so it doesn't fall down?
That's the logical assumption. If the bridge stays up, the engineer's is a success. If the code compiles and runs without bugs, the developer is good. But that's not what the study analyzed. It analyzed the financial success of these engineers.
Who got the promotions, who ended up running the firms, who actually made the most money.
And that's where you get this incredible split. The split was 15-85.
85-15, correct. The data indicated that only about 15% of one's financial success comes from their technical knowledge.
Only 15%.
The other 85%. It's due to skill in what he calls human engineering. Essentially, personality and the ability to lead people.
That is, and I think you said it before, a terrifying statistic for anyone who has spent years in a university library studying, differential equations.
It's a gut punch. You're telling me that all that technical competence, all that specialized knowledge is only worth 15% of the total value package.
Well, I might phrase it a little differently. I'd say technical competence is the entry fee.
The price of admission.
Exactly. The 15% gets you in the room. If you can't do the math, you don't even get the job in the first place.
Right.
But once you are inside that system, inside that company, technical skill becomes a commodity.
Because everyone in the room has it.
Everyone in the room can do the math. The real force multiplier, the variable that accounts for the huge difference in output and reward, is the ability to navigate the human systems without generating resistance. That's the 85%.
So that engineer who is, technically brilliant, maybe the best coder in the company, but is constantly correcting people in meetings or creates friction with other teams or argues about every little detail.
They are functionally capping their own value at 15%. They're broadcasting on a single channel in what is actually a multi-channel system. The source text suggests pretty clearly that the highest paid people in any industry aren't necessarily the ones who know the most about the product itself.
They're the ones who can align the human components.
Yes, the ones who can get all the human parts of the system to accept the product and move in the same direction.
Which brings us directly to what we're calling the invisible agent protocol. Because if the goal is to unlock that other 85%, the text suggests that the single biggest obstacle is, well, it's you. It's the operator's own ego.
It is, and to understand why, we have to look at this concept of the focus inversion. The source material points to a survey. It was a joint effort between the University of Chicago and the YMCA schools. They spent 2 years interviewing adults trying to map out their primary interests.
Right. This was a massive data set for its time. They just wanted to know, what do people actually think about all day?
Yeah.
What's running through their heads?
And the number one interest, not surprisingly, was health. Basic survival.
Makes sense.
But the number two interest was people. And this is where the nuance is absolutely critical. They weren't interested in other people in some, altruistic, humanistic sense.
No.
They were interested in how other people perceived them.
So boiled down, every single actor in any given system is broadcasting on the exact same frequency. And that frequency is me, me, me.
That's it, exactly. It's a bandwidth issue. If you walk into an interaction and you're broadcasting your own signal, your own desires, your own I want, your I need, you are just creating signal interference. The target is broadcasting I, and you are broadcasting I. The result is just noise.
And noise, in this model, creates friction. It triggers the defenses.
It does. So the invisible agent protocol demands that the operator suppress their own signal. You have to consciously invert the focus. To become invisible as a threat and therefore effective as an agent of influence, you must stop broadcasting your own needs and start amplifying the target signal.
This is where that famous line from Carnegie comes in. Talk in terms of the other person's interests. It sounds so simple on the surface. It sounds like basic politeness.
It does.
But you're suggesting it's not politeness at all. It's a tactical maneuver designed to clear the communications channel.
It is 100% tactical. When you talk about the target's interests, their problems, their goals, you are effectively bypassing their defensive filters. You're no longer perceived as an external entity trying to extract value from them.
You become part of their own internal story.
You become an extension of their own internal narrative. You're feeding their signal. You're not jamming it with your own.
The book uses that famous analogy of fishing, right? You don't beat the hook with strawberries and cream just because you, the fisherman, like strawberries and cream.
No, you bait it with a worm.
You bait it with what the fish wants.
It's a primitive analogy, but the core logic is sound. Most people, when they try to influence others, they do it by explaining why they, the influencer, needs something.
I need you to buy this product so I can make my quarterly quota.
Or, I need a raise because my rent just went up. This is a complete tactical failure. It's broadcasting on the I frequency, which the target, your boss, is biologically programmed to ignore or resist.
Because the target is only really tuned into the me frequency?
Precisely. So to preserve the ego of the target and to gain access, really, to their operating system, you have to align your request entirely with their want. You have to become the worm, to stick with the analogy.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second. If I'm constantly suppressing my own signal, if I'm always talking about what you want and what you care about, isn't there a risk of just becoming a doormat? Where is the line between this strategic invisibility and just being a pushover?
And that's the most common misinterpretation of the whole system. Invisibility does not mean passivity. It's not about having no goals.
Okay.
You absolutely still have an objective. You still want something, but you are cloaking that objective inside the target's desire. You're not abandoning what you want. You are just your project. You're packaging it in a way that the target's ego can ingest it without triggering an immune response.
An immune response. That's a great way to put it. Which, I mean, that segues perfectly into our second section, bypassing the firewall. Because if you mess this up, if you come in with a direct attack or a direct argument, you trigger what we're calling the threat response mechanism.
This is where the source material, if you're really reading between the lines, gets very dark very quickly. Carnegie uses these data points from some of the most high-profile criminals of his day. We're talking about Two-Gun Crowley, Al Capone, Dutch Schultz.
Yeah, and these aren't just random anecdotes he's telling for color. These are extreme edge cases of human psychology. Two-Gun Crowley, for instance, he was a cop killer. He was in a shootout, besieged by something like 150 police officers. And while he's literally bleeding out in the street, he writes a letter.
And the content of that letter is the crucial data point for this whole section. He didn't write, "I'm a monster," or "I've made terrible mistakes."
No. He wrote, "Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm."
And he had just murdered a police officer in cold blood for asking to see his driver's license?
It's unbelievable. And then you have Al Capone, the man who basically ran organized crime in Chicago. His public statement was, "I have spent the best years of my life giving people the lighter pleasures, and all I get is abuse."
He genuinely saw himself as a public benefactor who was misunderstood, not as a crime lord.
So the rationalization shield, as we're calling it, is nearly impenetrable. Even when you're facing the electric chair, the ego refuses to accept the label of bad.
And this is the critical extrapolation for the operator, for you listening. If a cop killer and a mob boss can construct a rationalization so powerful that it protects their ego from the guilt of actual murder, just imagine the strength of that same shield in an average person defending a minor mistake.
So if I walk up to a colleague and I say, "Hey, you made a mistake on page 5 of this report," or I tell my spouse, "You're just wrong about that political issue."
You think you're helping. You think you're offering a useful, logical correction.
Right. I'm providing accurate data.
But the target's brain does not receive a correction. It receives an attack. The ego perceives criticism not as information, but as a threat to its very existence. And that triggers what we call the justification reflex.
The shields go up.
Instantly. The target immediately constructs a defense, just like Capone did. It's never, "I made a mistake." It's, "Well, the instructions I was given were unclear." It's not, "I'm wrong." It's, "The media is biased against my side."
So direct criticism, even if it's factually 100% correct, is always a failure mode when it comes to influence.
It fails 100% of the time. You might win the battle over the fact, but you absolutely lose the person. And the source material is explicit on this. It says 99 times out of 100, people do not criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong they may be.
So any strategy, any protocol that relies on the target admitting they are wrong,
is fundamentally flawed. It's doomed to fail from the start because it goes against basic human programming.
This sounds incredibly grim. I mean, it implies that we're all, to some degree, dealing with people who are fundamentally delusional about their own competence and their own morality.
We are. And that includes ourselves, by the way. But the protocol isn't about judging that delusion. It's about navigating it. The moment you trigger that firewall, the entire system locks down. Game over.
Okay, so if direct assault doesn't work, how do we get past the firewall? The text introduces this idea, this Socrates protocol, the concept of getting to yes, yes.
This is a pure physiological hack. To understand it, we need to look at the biology of the no response. Carnegie brings in Professor Overstreet's analysis of the neuromuscular system here.
Right. He says when a person says no, and they really mean it, it's not just a word they're saying.
No, it's a full body state. The entire organism, glands, nerves, muscles, gathers itself into a condition of rejection. It's a physical withdrawal. The firewall is up, the portcullis is down.
And once a person is in that no state, trying to convert them to a yes is incredibly difficult.
It requires a massive expenditure of energy because you're literally fighting their body's chemistry.
So the Socrates protocol is all about building momentum in the other direction.
Exactly. The first rule is you must avoid triggering the no state at all costs. You begin the interaction by only emphasizing the things on which you both agree. You ask questions that are structured to guarantee a yes answer.
We both want this project to succeed, right?
Yes.
And we both agree the quality is important.
Yes. You're hacking the target's consistency bias. You are setting their entire organism psychologically and physically, in a forward-moving, open, affirmative direction.
And once that momentum is going toward yes, it becomes much harder for them to suddenly reverse course and say no.
You're greasing the slide. It's much easier for them to just keep saying yes.
There's another subroutine here that I found really fascinating, which is the face-saving protocol. The idea that you must never, ever corner the target. You have to leave them an escape hatch for their ego.
This is absolutely crucial, especially in high-stakes environments. The source data provides that case study of the engineer Charles Steinmetz at General Electric. It's a perfect encapsulation of high-level ego preservation.
So Steinmetz was a genius, an electrical wizard, indispensable to the company. But he was, by all accounts, a terrible manager, failing as a department head.
Right. So GE had this huge problem. They couldn't fire him. He was the mind behind their core technology. But they also couldn't keep him in charge of the department because he was causing chaos. A typical, less sophisticated corporation might have just demoted him.
Steinmetz, you're a brilliant engineer, but you're a bad manager. Step down.
Which would have been a direct attack on his ego. It would have triggered the firewall, he would have felt humiliated, attacked, and he likely would have quit and gone to a competitor.
So instead, GE engineered a completely different kind of solution.
They didn't demote him at all. They gave him a brand new title. They appointed him consulting engineer of the General Electric Company.
Which sounds incredibly important. It sounds magnificent.
It sounds like a major promotion. But in reality, it was a lateral move designed to strip him of all his management duties so he could just focus on pure engineering. The title itself was a form of what we're calling ego currency.
Ego currency, I like that.
It cost the company $0 financially, but it allowed Steinmetz to save face. He kept his status. He kept his feeling of self-importance.
And because his ego was safe, he accepted the change without any friction at all.
And that leads directly to the impossible to win paradox. The text states it very plainly. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
So in the Steinmetz case, if GE had argued with him about his poor management skills, they would have lost.
Even if they were right, they would have lost the asset. By avoiding the argument entirely and using ego currency instead, they achieved their desired outcome. They won.
It's interesting you call it a paradox because our culture, especially now, is obsessed with the idea of winning the debate. We love the mic drop moment. We're taught that if we have the facts on our side, we should win.
And that's the fundamental difference between what you might call academy logic and field logic. In the academy, in a debate club, the best, most logical argument wins. But in the field, in the real world, the human ego is the supreme arbiter of reality.
So if you win the argument by dismantling the other person's logic, you've publicly embarrassed them. You've struck a powerful blow to their self-importance.
And a person whose pride has been wounded is not an ally. They become an active insurgent working against you. The book quotes an old saying, "A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still."
So you might get that momentary dopamine hit from being right, but you've completely sacrificed your long-term influence.
The protocol demands that you choose. You must often sacrifice your own ego's desire to be right in order to be effective.
Okay, I want to shift gears here. We've laid out the historical data and the core mechanics of the system, but this deep dive is all about application. We need to see how these protocols actually run in a modern operating environment. So let's move to our third section, systemic application.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. We can map these, almost century-old protocols directly onto some of the most high-stakes modern industries. Let's start with venture capital and the founder's pitch.
This is a classic friction point. You have a founder who desperately needs money and an investor who has the money but is highly skeptical. And the founder almost always comes in pitching their product. Look at my beautiful code, look at my brilliant team, look at my early beta users.
They're selling the worm, to go back to that analogy. They're broadcasting on their own frequency. I have this great thing I built. But here's the key. The investor isn't buying a product. The investor is buying a future version of themselves, a future identity.
So applying that eager want protocol, arousing the other person an eager want, how does a smart founder reframe that pitch?
You have to stop selling the product features and start selling the investor's ego gratification. The pitch should never be, I need your money so I can build this app.
Yeah.
The pitch should be, this market is about to shift in a direction that only a handful of really smart people can see. You're clearly one of those people. By backing this venture, you are not just making money, you are cementing your status as a visionary.
Wow. So you're aligning the entire deal so that the act of saying yes confirms the investor's deeply held view of themselves as a genius.
That's it, exactly. You aren't asking them for a handout. You're offering them a vehicle to validate their own self-importance. You see, investors don't just want a return on investment. They want to be the one who saw it first. If you can frame your entire pitch around their foresight, their genius, you completely bypass the skepticism firewall.
That's a powerful shift.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to another high-friction environment, big tech leadership. This is a massive issue right now. How do you manage that high-ego, top-tier talent? You've got senior engineers, principal data scientists, people who know they are the smartest, most valuable assets in the building. You can't just order them around.
The old command and control model of leadership just completely fails here because it's a direct attack on the autonomy of their ego. The relevant source principle here is let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers.
Right. There's a data point in the text about a sketch artist who had this client who was just impossible to please, kept rejecting all the designs.
He did. So the artist changed his protocol. He stopped bringing in finished work. Instead, he brought in a few unfinished sketches, just raw data, really. And he asked the buyer, here are some ideas. How do you think we should finish these so they work best for you?
He didn't give him a product to approve. He gave him a problem to co-author the solution to.
And the buyer loved the final result. He bought several. And why? Because it was his idea. In a modern engineering context, this is a version of the IKEA effect. If a VP of engineering goes to a lead architect and says, build the new system this way, what happens?
The architect immediately starts looking for flaws. They'll resist because it's an external idea being imposed on them. It's a challenge to their expertise.
But if that same VP goes to the architect and says, we have a massive latency problem that's costing us millions, how would you architect a solution to solve it?
Well, now the architect is building their solution. It's their baby.
And they will work nights and weekends to make sure it's perfect. They'll defend it passionately against other departments. The execution friction drops to absolute zero because the project has become a direct extension of their professional ego. The leader's job isn't to have the best idea, it's to plant the seed of the problem so the talent thinks they discovered the solution.
It's manipulation, but at the same time, it's a form of empowerment. That is a very blurry line.
It's human engineering. The desired outcome is a functional, elegant system. The method to get there is ego alignment.
Okay, let's look at one final context, one that affects every single person listening. Product design and user experience, or UX. We are all glued to our phones. The question is why?
We're glued to them because the modern smartphone app is the ultimate ego preservation machine. The two source principles at play here are make the other person feel important, and the classic, remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language.
And social media platforms are basically just industrial-scale factories designed to produce that feeling of importance.
Think about something as simple as a push notification. What is it, really? It's a digital tap on your shoulder saying, you matter. Someone just liked what you said. Someone commented on your photo.
It's a constant stream of validation for the user's existence.
Precisely. If an app was just a cold, impersonal utility, we wouldn't be addicted to it. We are addicted because the entire interface is constantly telling us that we are the protagonist of the story. Good morning, Dave. Here's a special memory for you, Dave. People are reacting to what Dave posted. It is the Socrates protocol and the ego preservation interface, automated and delivered at planetary scale.
It's just wild to think that these incredibly complex algorithms running on supercomputers in vast data centers are, at their core, just executing the simple advice of a traveling salesman from Missouri from 1936.
The delivery technology changes. The underlying human biology remains exactly the same. The ego-firewall is the same in 2024 as it was in 1936. The mechanisms to bypass it haven't fundamentally changed, only the speed and scale of their delivery.
And this brings us to the final and I think maybe the most difficult part of our decoding today. Section 4, the cost of this system. Because as we've been talking, I've had this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. This all sounds utterly exhausting.
It is. It is extremely high-cost emotional and cognitive labor. We call it the harmony trap.
The text makes a really sharp distinction between appreciation and flattery.
Yeah.
Flattery is easy, it's cheap, you just tell people what they want to hear, whether you mean it or not.
And Carnegie calls flattery counterfeit money. He says it might work on fools, but it will always fail with intelligent, perceptive targets because they can sense the insincerity. And he insists, and this is the hardest part of the entire system, that the appreciation you show must be sincere.
Sincere. So you're telling me I have to actually genuinely find something to admire about the person who is screaming at me over a trivial issue? I have to find something to respect in the obvious incompetence of a bad employee. How is that possible?
That is the cognitive cost. To execute the system effectively, the operator can't just fake it. You can't just act interested. You have to fundamentally reprogram your own attention. You have to actively, consciously suppress your natural, instantaneous impulse to judge, to correct, or to dismiss someone. You have to force your brain to scan for the 1% of good, even when the 99% of bad is overwhelming you.
That's a massive amount of emotional labor. It requires a level of self-control that, frankly, most people probably don't have.
It is a form of continuous self-abnegation. You are constantly filtering your own impulses. You want to honk your horn at the driver who cut you off. You can't. The protocol says you have to try to honestly understand their point of view. You want to completely destroy someone's flawed argument in a debate with facts and logic. You can't. The protocol demands you avoid the argument to preserve the relationship.
The book uses that quote from Abraham Lincoln: "A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall."
It's true. But what we forget is that collecting honey is slow, patient, sticky work. Swatting the fly with a newspaper is fast and satisfying. The protocol demands you take the slow, difficult path of honey because the end result is capture, not destruction. But the operator pays for that capture with their own energy and patience.
And there's a cost. There's a trade-off here regarding the truth. We talked about this a bit during the prep. If my absolute top priority is always ego preservation, if I always have to let the other person save face, or I have to let them think the great idea was actually theirs, what happens to objective truth in that equation?
And that is the central strategic question that every single person listening has to answer for themselves. The Carnegie system prioritizes effectiveness over accuracy. In that General Electric example, was Steinmetz really a consulting engineer? Was that the truth?
No, of course not. It was a complete fiction, a useful fiction, but a fiction nonetheless.
Exactly. The system suggests that truth, with a capital T, is often a direct obstacle to function. You might have to let someone believe they are right, even when you know for a fact they are wrong, just to get the project moving forward. You might have to suppress the fact that you saved the day and let your boss take all the credit in order to keep your job secure and maintain a functional team.
So you constantly have to choose. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be effective and get what you want?
And Carnegie argues, quite starkly, that being right is often a consolation prize for the lonely and ineffective. He has that line, "He who cannot do this walks a lonely way."
That's a heavy line. It really implies that social and professional success requires a constant, conscious sacrifice of your own ego.
I think civilization itself is essentially a massive, complex web of egos that have all agreed not to constantly attack and destroy each other so that commerce and society can continue. We all tacitly agreed to uphold each other's necessary illusions. All Carnegie did was write down the bylaws of that unspoken agreement.
And if you refuse to sign those bylaws, if you insist on radical honesty at all times, on always correcting the error, on always claiming your credit,
you become a foreign body in the social organism. The system's immune response will target you and reject you. You might be right, but you will almost certainly be alone and powerless.
So the ultimate decoding here is that politeness in the Carnegie model isn't about being nice. It's about being strategically intelligent. It's about survival.
It is a survival protocol for a social species that runs on the high-octane fuel of ego.
This book doesn't teach you how to make friends.
It teaches you how to stop being an obstacle to other people's self-importance.
Carnegie realized that you can win almost any battle if you let the other person keep the trophy.
And when the ego feels safe, the gates of influence swing wide open.
If you now see politeness as a strategic protocol rather than just a social habit, the decoding worked.
To keep seeing the hidden logic in the books that shape our world, subscribe to Decoded by Morrow.
We don't replace books, we decode them.
You've reached the end of this exploration, but not the end of the idea. Let it echo. Let it integrate. And when you're ready for the next step, return to Decoded by Morrow. Wisdom is a journey, not a conclusion. Let's decode.